So, we have this conversation around D&I, right? And it's basically based on what we all know, which is when we have difference in thought, difference of opinion, we have the ability to do more than when we have a singular or myopic way of thinking.
Welcome back to the Cannonball mindset. And so here's the thing. So usually I know somebody for a long, I've known of them or I know them for a long period of time. But we just chatted for the first time ever. The same day I found out about you, we talked.
Yeah, man.
And we ended up talking for like an hour.
Yep.
45 minutes on the phone. And we were from way back, right?
That's true. Kindred spirits.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, so true. And I was like, when can you get here? When can we do this podcast? And I didn't want to do it over the phone or computer. I said, you got to come live. And then you were traveling. But I'm sitting here with Torian Richardson, the founder of Guangxi
Universal. Yes, sir.
University, and working on a documentary. We'll get into the D&I conversation and all that in a couple minutes, but just an all-around awesome guy. And what's cool is probably for one of the first times since I've been doing the podcast, I'm always excited about doing it, but I think I'm going to learn a lot about. Usually I have the research. Yeah. But I think I'm going to learn a lot in this conversation because the 2 times we've talked on the phone and then today, I'm like, I could just sit here and rap with you for forever because just good guy, good spirit. And so why don't you introduce yourself and then let's get into this shit.
Yeah, man. Well, first of all, thank you for even having me here, bro. I mean, I do appreciate not only being present here, but just that initial conversation. Yeah. Right away, I knew that not only would we be doing something like this, but just having that connection around purpose, having a greater purpose, not only to serve what we're trying to do from a business standpoint, but just putting out great content that inspires people. So I appreciate and applaud you, man, just for having me out.
I appreciate it. Listen, I live 5 minutes away. You just got off of a 23-hour flight from the other side of the world, right?
This is true.
So I didn't know if I actually have a cot set up for you or something. Like you wanted to sleep a little bit, but you're like, no, I'm cool. I just got off the plane literally a couple hours ago, and now you're in my office. So yeah, man. Thanks again. So tell me about yourself.
Yeah, so my name is Torian Richardson. I'm originally from the Chicagoland area. My family hails from the south side of Chicago. I grew up in 3 different neighborhoods in the Chicagoland area, in the Gresham, West Englewood area, and then Justice, which is a near west suburbs of Chicago, and then in the Aurora, Naperville area for part of my high school years and for college as well. So my background is pretty diverse. I've worked in a lot of different areas, from general management to sales to marketing, product development, business development in Africa. Lived in Nigeria, but worked throughout the continent of Africa for about a year and a half. Started the company I have now, Guangxi Universal, when I was living in Beijing, China, and worked in London and parts of Europe for a little bit, as well as the United States. So, from all the things I just talked about, I'm just trying to figure out life, bro. Yeah. I mean, that's really what it comes down to, trying to figure it out, man.
Yeah, we have a mutual friend. This HB says, we're talking one night at our mastermind group, and he's like, Chad, listen, I got the guy you got to meet. And you hear that, people. It's so crazy because you have a podcast, and people are like, they always say, I have somebody for you. Well, he's like, Chad, you got to meet this guy. You got to meet him. I'm like, all right, because HB's like the man.
He's good.
So you got to take you to this guy.
Awesome human being.
Yeah, right? And he's like, no, you got to meet him. I was like, all right. And I called, and I was like, yeah. You know what I'm saying? And I think there's so many topics I want to talk to you about. I think that, and I asked you before the show, as I asked everybody, is there anything you don't want to talk about? And you're like, no, anything. I'm like, politics, yes. Religion, yes. Diversity, yes. Race, yes. Like all of these things I want to kind of dive into. But we were talking before about diversity, and inclusion, and that's what you specialize in this, right? This is your. So tell me, what does that mean? What does D&I even mean, and why is it important to know this?
Boy, yeah, I'll tell you what, man. For me, that's a bit of a loaded question, only because my thought process, my methodology in working with individuals and with working with organizations doesn't necessarily fit into the traditional diversity and inclusion mode. So, we have this conversation around D&I, right? And it's basically based on what we all know, which is when we have difference in thought, difference of opinion, we have the ability to do more than when we have a singular or myopic way of thinking, right? So to me, that's pretty basic. Now, if you look at the conversation that's happening within most diversity and inclusion officers or organizations or consultants that are out there, one of the things is there's a lot of pointing as to what the issues are, right? Which is, of course, we have to be aware of that and we have to understand what they are. But it's not really centered around what are the organizations or the people who have been extremely successful around creating new environments, right? So the way I approach diversity and inclusion is not even using that term. It's really around solidarity. It's around how do we, as two human beings or as an organization or as an HR manager or a leader within an organization, how do we actually create something new based upon having difference of thought, difference of opinion, different ways of seeing things, different ways of experiencing the world, right? One of the things that I know that brings us a special level of expertise is not only the fact that I'm an African American or Black American or whatever term you would like to put on that, it's that I've had the honor and the privilege to be able to work and live on 4 different continents. I've managed and led people from different backgrounds. I've had people that reported into me as an executive that were 20 years my senior when I lived in Africa, right? So when we talk about diversity, it's diversity in thought, it's diversity in perspective, not just the cursory, hey, my pigment is a little bit darker than yours, right? Or my genes are different or my hormones are different, but how do we actually bring in things that are going to challenge how we actually see the world? And that comes from thoughts, that comes from cultures, even emotional intelligence as well, right?
Yeah, so there's a lot in there.
Yeah.
So, the idea that it seems in my mind, it seems so easy, right? You are Black, I am Caucasian, you are African American, I am whatever terminology, right?
Right.
We have 2 different backgrounds, we have 2 different upbringings, we have 2 different programming, we're 2 different colors. Why does that matter? Why does that matter in the why is it such a big issue? Like, for me, it doesn't seem like it's an issue. You're a smart guy, I'm a smart guy, let's create something great. Why is it a bigger issue? I know that's a big question to ask you, but why is it an issue?
Well, I think it's an issue. Well, it doesn't have to be an issue. That's probably the best way to say that. It doesn't have to be an issue. But the challenge is that you process the world based on what? Based on your experiences,
Correct.
Based on the stories that are a part of those experiences, and how you actually, the lens that you perceive the world, just like the cameras that we have that are actually recording this podcast, right? So you put on a different lens, you're going to get a different point of view, a different look, different colors, et cetera, right? But the challenge is that when you're working with people, a lot of times that your lens may press up against how I perceive the world, and it can become threatening. Right? Because if I think, hey, the only way to do this is my way, and you come in with, yeah, but I'm looking at that and it looks a little bit different, then it starts to press up to not only how I see things, but also my values, things that I think are important. And it becomes challenging within organizations because when you're inside of an organization and you're trying to innovate, you have to be able to, 1, acknowledge that everybody is coming to the table with different ways of seeing things. And then 2, if we're really trying to create something new, we have to address what is the status quo. Yeah. We have to acknowledge that. And then we have to say, how do we take the good parts of the status quo? How do we add on to that with the diversity and different people in different fields of thought so that we can create a new environment, a new product, a new culture, things of that matter. So those are the things that don't have to matter, but they matter if we let them hinder us from progress.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I get it. I think, but it seems like the conversation that needs to be had is the conversation that nobody wants to have, and that is that I do have a different perspective. I do have a different lens than you have a different lens. Of course. And so if we're a product of our lens, there's a great book. Actually, I gave it to you. It's in that bag, right? By a guy named Wes Moore. It's called The Other Wes Moore. One of my top 5 favorite books of all time. Best. I think every human being should read this book, The Other Wes Moore. And he talks about 2 kids in Baltimore, grew up at the same exact time, same exact name, never knew each other. both named Westmore. One went on to be a Rhodes Scholar and write a New York Times best-selling book, the other Westmore. The other is in jail for murder. How does that happen? Same circumstances, right? How does that happen? And he calls it the expectation gap. It's one had expectations of grandeur and more, and one did not. And the idea that they have different lenses. I have a different lens, and their programming calls them to see things the way they see things.
Yes.
So if I'm a kid in downtown Baltimore right now, if I'm an African American kid in downtown Baltimore, the way I view the world is much different than the way a kid that lives in middle of Kansas, in the rural suburbs of Kansas, sees the world.
Absolutely.
And that's their programming. But isn't that okay? Isn't that like that they see the world differently? It's not a problem that they see the world differently. It's a problem that they can't come together and create a different world where they see things universally.
Absolutely, that's not a problem. It should be that way because everybody experiences different, right? You talk about a kid from Kansas, a kid from Baltimore. How about if we grew up in India? Right?
Yeah, right.
Our perception is not only going to be different, our taste buds are going to be different because we were exposed to different foods early on, right? So it's not the difference that is the issue, right? The challenge is how do we, and I'll just cut straight to it. It starts internally, right? So for me, my family's from the south side of Chicago, and I grew up candidly in an abusive environment, right? Physical abuse, emotional, right? A lot of different things that were actually happening in the home to the point to where I actually felt safer outside of my home than I actually felt in the home, right? And for a very long time growing up into my teenage years, even into my early 20s, I was extremely angry because of a lot of things that I had seen and I had experienced. But it wasn't until I actually became fed up with being angry internally and started to turn that lens inside of myself to say, all right, man, listen, this doesn't feel good, right? Like being upset, using that to motivate you in sports, which is one of the things that I tried to do when I played football or ran hurdles or even tried to wrestle. But once that was done and I was in my career, there was nothing to mask it. And I had to look at myself and say, why am I upset? And then how is that affecting the people around me, how I show up at work, how people experience me, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. This happens regardless of if a kid is coming from Baltimore, coming from Kansas, or anywhere in between. So having that internal conversation as to how do I process the world, why do I see it that way, and really challenging our own personal perceptions, that's where it really starts. Right. If we want to cut right to it.
That's exactly right. Because for me, we want to challenge others' perspective.
Yeah.
We want to question other people's lens in the way they view the world, but we refuse to challenge our own lens because it becomes a battle. We both plant our flags in the ground and say, "Well, my lens." I see it now. I see it in politics now that you're not known by your own opinions. You're known by this label of your political party.
right.
And it's crazy. I don't care if you watch Fox, if you watch CNN.
Doesn't matter.
It's irrelevant because both sides refuse to look inward and say, "What am I doing to what am I doing to contribute to this, and what do I need to change?"
Yep.
It's easier for me to say, I just had this conversation with my daughters. I said they were having trouble at school with somebody, and I said, listen, there's two types of people in the world. There's people that make themselves look good on their own merits, and there's people that make themselves look good on the lack of others' merits. And you need to choose which side you're going to be on, right? And the idea of me challenging your lens without checking the lens that I'm viewing the world in first and getting that shit straight.
Yep.
That's to me that's the first step, as you just said, right?
Absolutely, it is a first step. It is. So like when I work with clients, I talk about the word inclusion, right? Yeah. Because a lot of times the whole conversation around solidarity is not even a part of the lexicon in a corporate environment. I wish that it were, and we're working toward making that more of the conversation. But there are 4 different ways that we look at inclusion, right? You have first societal, right? You're talking about the United States of America. You're talking about North America. You have institutions that are in place. You have governance and governments that are in place that you have injustice. You have different systems, different courts, whatever the case may be, that people may not feel included or they're not a part of that societal norm, right? Happens everywhere. Every society, doesn't really matter. It's been a part of it. But then you can scale that down to the institutional level. And that could be a bank, right? Or that could be any company that has a certain culture in which they're working through certain ways to include people. But those are still very large. And for most people, they don't necessarily have control, if you will, over that institution or over that society. But where we do have control, and this is where it gets very difficult, is second is relational, right? That's the relationship that you and I have. As you and I get to know each other, the fact that we are different, that we come from different backgrounds, that we have different ways of seeing things becomes less and less of value because we have a true personal connection and we're trying to listen to each other to see where the other person is coming from. So that's the interpersonal side of inclusion. And then the hardest part is what we've been talking about, which is the internal part. And that's the questioning of ourselves, how we see things, or even as an organization, we say we value this, but how do we actually make decisions when it's tough to make those decisions? So those 4 elements are what I like to identify. And when we work with clients, it really starts with the individual and the interpersonal, because you and I can affect that. We are actually creating an environment in this room right now. As we speak, as we listen to each other or not, right? We're creating a culture, and that's because we're developing an interpersonal relationship that's there. So we are creating something new in that inclusion process right there. And that's what we need to focus more on, as opposed to what has been the case and what continues to be the case, which is in order for us to be right, everyone on the other side has to be wrong, which is what happens in politics, right? I'm blue. Or I'm a Crip, or whatever, right. Those are the Bloods, or from where I'm from, those are the Blackstones. We're the gangster disciples. And just because they're that, everything that they says is incorrect, is not aligned with us, and we're against everything that they possibly do. And that mindset is toxic to the human experience, period.
Why has it gotten so? I couldn't agree more. And I will. So I have my own idea of what government should do. I have my own idea of what how I view the world, and so if you were to say CNN, Fox, right? I lean to one side of those two. I never watch the one that I would agree with more. I always watch the channel that would drive me crazy and that I have most differences with. I'm saying 98% of the time I'm watching the station where what the commentators, what the announcers, what they're reporting, I disagree with most of it. And I remember somebody saying, I don't understand why you watch that station. I'm like, well, because I already know that this station's going to tell me what I want to hear.
Exactly.
I don't get any better by watching that.
Exactly.
I feel better. It makes me feel better, like somehow pads my ego that somebody on TV's patting me on the back and saying, I believe what you believe, but I don't get better that way.
Right.
I get better by listening to the people that absolutely drive me crazy with some of their thoughts. And the idea of that's how you get better, isn't it? I'm saying that's how you broaden your horizon, because I want to evolve. I want to evolve, and I want to have different thoughts and opinions.
I agree with you 100%, but this goes back to the initial conversation, right? Intent, the word that you have here on the board for 2019. I would argue that a lot of us, probably way too many, are not really trying to grow, right? We want to hear an opinion or a thought that further substantiates what we already think, because that's what's comfortable, right? Yeah, you know what? The system has been oppressed on my back, as an African-American man. And you know what? That means that everybody who is not like me is wrong. In fact, they owe me. The system owes me, right? And of course, there are injustices that are part of the system, et cetera, but that does not mean that across the board, ubiquitously, that this segment of people owe you something, right? Or vice versa. And so that's just my mindset in going into different things. And it's been interesting because I've gotten a lot of pushback, and some of that pushback has been from members of, I guess, the category or community I'm a part of, and or some diversity and inclusion leaders, because I think that if we focus on the 97% of things that we have in common, that is how we really move the needle forward in an exponential way.
I think you're right. Listen, I think, and I've heard you say this before. You just said it again. I think that as a society, we have 90 to 95% of things in common. There's no question. I think people, government-wise, most people believe the same thing in social issues and most issues. I think that what we focus on, the arguing and the bickering and the fighting, For some reason that sells. For some reason that's it drives me crazy. Like if I told a client a couple of weeks ago, I said, listen, if I give you 2 blank notebooks, and I say, I want you to take this notebook and I want you to walk around today, and I want you to write down everything you see good in the world, everything, they will fill that notebook up. Yeah. And I said, I'm going to give you this other notebook. I want you to travel around throughout your day, throughout the world today, and I want you to write down everything that you see bad. Yeah. They're going to fill that notebook up. Yeah. It's a personal choice of what notebook you want to write in, isn't it?
It is a personal choice, no question. But it's different. I mean, think about, and I challenge the listeners and the viewers to do the exact same thing. Listen to the people that are around your circle, or it might even be you that is this person. Yeah. Listen to the words that they use, the context in which they use them, and is it something that is positive, or is feeding or breathing life into other people, or is it something that is actually taking away? And a lot of times, because of the energy that someone may have internally inside of them, it can be derogatory. Right. And so we choose to connect with the energy that we have inside of us. And this may sound like really metaphysical and everything, but to me it isn't, because it's at the very core of a lot of the challenges that we're talking about. When we are internally in the process of healing and becoming whole, right, and we have empathy and we're able to show up and say, you know what, here's how I see something, but let me really sit down and talk to Chad and just try to understand where he's coming from. I don't have to agree with everything. But if I'm coming in empathetically, it's not about what I think. It's about what you think. Yeah. I want to listen to what you have to say, right? And this way, I can't demonize you. I can't say, oh, he's a bad person, or he's a devil, or he's this, or he's that, because I have a baseline understanding as to why you process or to perceive the world the way that you do. And if we were able to show up and do that with human beings, corporate environment, one-on-one, anything in between, we will truly be able to move the needle. But I don't think that a lot of us are doing that. And a lot of it has to do with internally, we don't feel good, right? We may be going to a job that we hate. We may be doing something that we hate to do professionally. Living paycheck to paycheck. We may be in a relationship that is toxic, and then we're finding other ways to subsidize that. So that toxicity starts to brew, man. And it's interesting because, I work with individual clients and coaches and organizations, but it really comes down to a lot of these spiritual and emotional things. Now, of course, I don't lead with that, because a lot of times organizations may not want to see that up front, but that's what it comes down to.
Oh, no, I agree. I think for me, you touched on a couple of things there, so I think you're exactly right. I think that the part is, in that corporate setting, how do you have that conversation? In the corporate setting, it seems to me, and I work with a lot of corporate clients, it seems more to me that people want to avoid those conversations. They want to almost do inclusion training or have these conversations to check it off a box. Yes. To say, listen, we've done this, right? You have to watch this. I have a client who makes their employee, if you're a new employee, you got to watch the sexual harassment training. Yep. You got to watch the diversity training. You got to watch but they're not doing it to evoke real change. Yeah. They're doing it so they can say that they did it.
Exactly.
And how do you get past that?
Well, you have to challenge or press against how an organization measures success. Yeah. I mean, really. Because we say, hey, we value this, or here are our values, or our mission statement, or our culture, and it's written on the wall, right? But how do we really know, just like with an individual, what they value? It's about what they do over a period of time. That's how it's substantiated, especially when it's difficult, especially when you have to make short-term financial decisions that are based around things that are important to you or centered around your purpose. So asking that question and then looking for proof in the discovery process of working with organizations is one of the things that I try to do all the time. These are the 5 things that you value. Can you give me 10 case studies as to when you all have made a decision that financially may have gone against looking at the books, but were aligned to the things that you say are part of your culture. Yeah. And that becomes very difficult. Really, it becomes difficult for people, right?
Oh. Yeah, I was bidding on a client. I was trying to get this client last year, and in our conversation, they had this doing research on them, and I was on a call with them doing the prospecting call, and they had touted this mission statement. They had this mission statement. It was all over their website. It was on the walls in their office. The employees had to carry this mission statement card. And in the conversation, I said to him, I said, listen, you have a great mission statement, but you're not on a mission. And I
love it.
And I think that's, and for me, I'm not going to be the right fit for you.
Right.
And listen, I needed the money. I'm a new business. I'm a growing business. I needed the money, but I'm not a training company to check it off a box.
Right.
If you can't have if I can't talk about God in my workshop, if I can't have a conversation, listen, I don't need to lead with God, but it'd be against what I believe not to include God in my own talk for me.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
So the idea that most people will have a mission statement, a great mission statement that's crafted by a great marketing department.
Right.
But most people either have forgotten the mission they're on or they're on no mission. And there's a big difference there, isn't it?
Well, there's a big difference, and then you can question were they ever really on it, right? There's a difference between saying, hey, we're going to come up with something that's a part of a great slogan or a marketing project as opposed to, and I'll just use Chick-fil-A, right? Yeah. Had Chick-fil-A this morning. Love their breakfast sandwiches, by the way.
Yeah. And I'm a big Chick-fil-A breakfast sandwich guy.
But you know, they're not open on Sundays, and I think pretty much everyone knows why, right? Yeah. That has financial consequences, or at least short term, right? Yeah. But it also connects people to the organization that really believe in what they do, why they do it, and they support that, which can manifest itself in so many different ways, even financially over a period of time. And I think we are seeing a bit of a shift to organizations that are moving toward that and really anchoring themselves in that. But Chick-fil-A is just a good example of an organization that's growing exponentially, that's doing it well.
Oh, huge. There's one open around the corner from here. And I've done a lot of research on them, and people said they would never last not being open on Sunday. But they're following, I think they have a large clientele that is more loyal to them because they aren't open on Sundays.
Absolutely.
Right?
They pay a little bit more. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm saying it's chicken. It's chicken, right? Should I pay $5 for a chicken sandwich? It's good chicken, but I'll pay. So, all right. So that's kind of, so I love your 4 steps. Give me the 4 steps of inclusion one more time.
Yeah. So I mean, and it's all premised under this, right? So inclusion has these 4 steps of, you look at it from a societal standpoint, and that's a big picture, government, society, a nation state, right? Then you look at it institutionally, right? So that can be within an organization, usually smaller than society, obviously, but it's maybe a private organization. Then, and most importantly, is interpersonally, like you and I, like the relationships that I have, right, with people. But the hardest part that I've found, and where it's really rooted, is the internal process of inclusion. And that's really questioning why I see things the way I see them, how I perceive the world. Where does that come from? Why do I think these certain things? And I've learned a lot about this, and this model came to me from living and working on so many different continents and experiencing so many different types of people. Because one of the reasons I love traveling so much, whether it be personal or professional, is that it presses against what you think is right. Because, and I'll give you an example. So, we were talking a little bit earlier. I just came back from Madagascar filming the show, and I had a long layover in Istanbul. And I've always wanted to take a Turkish bath, right? And so having the opportunity to go in and do that, found one that was historic, had been in Istanbul for over 1,000 years, and went inside and just had an opportunity to see the marvel of just how beautiful the architecture was, the whole process behind going in and doing this. So I walk in, and it was interesting because it was hot, 1, and 2, you're undressing, and there are, men that are actually getting ready to, there's no other way to say it, to wash you, right? Yeah. So I'm like, okay, this is pressing against my social norm in itself, right? Right. And so you walk into this large room, and it's beautiful, man. It's beautiful. You look up, and they have holes in the wall, but it kind of looks galactic, so it's looking like you're looking at a night sky. No lights inside, so the only thing that's coming in is the sun beaming down. And it's this huge slab of marble that can fit 40, 50 people to lie on it. And so I lie down. This marble is hot. It's not like burning hot, but it certainly isn't cool. So it's like a sauna, right? Yeah. And so I'm sitting there. You lie there for about 30 minutes, and you kind of start to sweat, get things out. So I'm like, okay, this is cool. It's great. Looks great. Feel like I'm a part of a movie or something like that. And then a man comes in, pulls me over to the side, and he pulls out a brush, or 2 brushes actually, puts them on his hand, and he starts rubbing my body, like essentially scraping and exfoliating every part of my body. Right. So I'm thinking to myself, boy, this is challenging everything that I know to be true about masculinity and how I grew up, about how men should interact with each other, particularly when they're naked in a vulnerable state, right? Yeah. I was uncomfortable, no other way to say it, right? And he wasn't making me uncomfortable. This was a part of their tradition. So I'm lying there, and it's hurting, right? He's scraping me with these brushes. Yes. And so then he's like, come on. He kind of brings me over into another room where he begins to wash all of that off, all the dead skin and exfoliating. And then he scrubs my body with like suds that I'd never seen before. It was like the best bubble bath ever. But you have a guy washing you, and then another guy comes in. So I have 2 men washing me in this Turkish bath as I'm gazing into the sky. And everything about that was uncomfortable, and then it became a little bit more uncomfortable because then there was a call of prayer, because Turkey's a majority Islamic state. Loud everywhere, you could hear it echoing throughout the chamber. So my sense of religion and faith, masculinity, how men should interact, personal hygiene, all of these things at that moment were being challenged for me, and I feel. I work in this space, that I'm a pretty open and inclusive person, but it just made me really think about the things that I knew to be true, right, and what to be right. Even in that situation, for me, it made me uncomfortable. But that's the growth opportunity. That is where, for me, I've learned how to grow and to really see things a little bit differently. Because even though we didn't grow up that way here in the United States, this is a 1,000-year-old tradition that men, kings, emperors of the Ottoman Empire have been doing this for centuries, right? Yeah. So I use that as a small, fun example, but it's the perfect example as to how many people really get outside of their comfort zone to do that, right? So that's the internal process for me.
Love that story. I'm saying there's so much there in the sense of, personally, the idea that, think about that kid that grew up in Chicago.
Right.
That kid in Chicago is not, they couldn't even fathom that one day you're, in a Turkish bath. But you're right, it's been going on for 1,000 years. And most people see the Turkish bath and they just don't even walk in the door. Yeah. It's just much easier to say that's not who I am, rather than let me find out if that's who I am. Let me grow and that's, again, that's part of our, that how do you come to that? So how do you get to the point where you're willing to challenge your norms, that you're willing to literally step outside your comfort zone?
That's a great question, man, and it's one of the things I'm actually writing about. It's a term that I've kind of coined as courageous vulnerability. Right? It takes a lot of courage to be consistently vulnerable. And for me, I learned getting outside of my comfort zone. And I'll take you back to the story of my family. So just growing up in an abusive home, in an abusive environment, one of the things that I really loved to do was to get on my bike and just ride. And I would go to different neighborhoods. I would go to areas called like Burbank and Oak Lawn, ride in certain parts of Inglewood at one point in the south side of Chicago, but then just different places with different ethnicities, right? And then when we moved out to the suburbs, I would do the same thing. And I would just notice that people did things a little bit differently, right? And it could be from washing their car to how they were raising their children to how they played, economics. It's the first time I noticed, hey, I used to love to watch 90210. And then when we moved to the western suburbs, I was living in 90210, right? Mm-hmm. I was living kind of an environment where people had a little bit more affluence. And it really started that process for me to start thinking to myself, you know what? I do understand this environment because this is what I grew up in, but there has to be something more. There has to be something different. And the only way that I'm going to get exposed to that is for me to get outside of what I think is right, to be uncomfortable, to be courageously vulnerable enough to ask questions about, hey, why do you do things that way? Or why do you see things that way? Where does that come from for you? And the more and more I started to do that, one, the more friends I started to have, because I actually asked those questions because I really cared. It wasn't just for selfish reasons. And then two, the more understanding and the more compassion I started to have for other people. And it just exploded for me, man. It went from riding a bike throughout the south side and the western suburbs of Chicago to, traveling to over 75 countries around the world, So,
yeah. And so that's your warrior march, right? You've done this. How does that? At what point do somebody that's listening to this right now, that the whole idea of introspection, the whole idea of looking inward and questioning your beliefs and what's your norms and your truth?
Yeah.
How does one do that today? How does one to me? I think a lot of people aspire. I work with this guy, this leader, who unbelievably successful. I mean, financial just wizard, business owner, millions upon millions of dollars, built an unbelievable company from nothing, but he's failing at other parts of his life, personal life, his health, his fatherhood. When I say failing to me is being capable of more and not doing more.
Yes.
And so but he can't take that step to actually change. He says he wants change. A lot of people say they want change,
right?
But they get stuck at the questioning where they are kind of phase.
Yeah. Well, for me, and when I work with clients, it's always been, and it goes back to what we were talking about with organizations. How do you define success, right? So I don't know if you're familiar with the poem "The Dash." I can't remember who the author is, but if you get a chance to check it out, and it basically talks about everybody has a born date. We have a day that we die, at least on the face of this planet, right? But what it really comes down to is not the tenure in which we have the dash in between, but what we do at that time. And just taking the time to really sit down, and this is, it goes back to building a business, because we have to look at ourselves as a business, intentionality, and just writing down what does success mean to me? What is a successful life? When I'm lying down on my deathbed and I'm talking to the people that I care about and that I love, these are the three things that matter the most. And for me, in doing that, everything that I do has to be centered around those things, right? Yeah. And my own personal model that I use, business or professional, is three things, right? It's equity, or having a sense of ownership is probably the best way to say it. Having ownership in the outcomes and things that I'm doing, or people that I'm interacting with, where there's a sense of I am responsible for this, right? There's a sense of agency around it. The second one is experience, right? I never wanted to be that person to have a whole lot of financial wealth, but never experienced the world, or never left the Chicagoland area, whatever the case may be. So experiencing the world in some way, shape, or form, and helping others to experience the world. And then the third part is impact, right? Because, if we think about the real successful leaders, the Bill Gates, we'll throw Gandhi in there, we'll throw an Oprah Winfrey, just to, some names that people are familiar with. Yes, financial wealth was a part of that for some of them, or access to resources, but it really came down to the impact that they made on other people, right? Exactly. So for me, it's that ownership piece, right? It's the experience, and it's the impact on others. And if it doesn't have those three components that are a part of it, I don't do it. Yeah. That's how I measure success.
Yeah, I love that. For me, I'm with you. And so for me, I just did this exercise this last week, and I'll do it next week. And that is, people need to be able to, write down what, and I said this is to the owner, write down what the perfect life looks like for you in this area. As you as a father, what do you vision? Do you vision that you come home at 6:00 and your kids run into your arms and say, "Hi, Daddy, how was your day?" And you go in and you sit down and eat a fine cooked meal, and then you sit and do homework, and what does the perfect vision of you look like in that area? And what I found was people shortchange themselves.
For sure.
And they envision less than what they're actually capable of. And I know this for a fact, because this is how I live my life.
Yeah.
I live my life by settling for what I had and tried to convince myself that it was as good as I can get.
Exactly.
And it wasn't but once you realize that you are deemed worthy of a life of abundance.
Absolutely.
I was, leave the faith conversation out of it, but I will tell you that I was deemed worthy of an abundant life. Abundance of love, abundance of success, abundance of health, abundance of whatever, a limitless life.
Yep.
But until you believe you're worthy of it, you settle for what you have. But once you know that you're worthy of it, that's what I'm searching for now. And somebody said, well, Chad, what happens when you get to that perfect life? And I'm like, well, then I want more. I want to strive for more, because you can't be created for a life of lack, right? That's not possible, is it? Like, is it possible that we're created just to have lack and and strife and suffer? No,
absolutely,
right?
Absolutely not. And I am a faith-based person, so I do not believe that God or Allah, the universe, whatever noun that someone likes to put on that, put us on this planet so that we could limit ourselves. Absolutely not. There's way too much here. Right. And I'm not talking about material things. I'm talking about real, true human connection. I'm talking the ability to manifest things. I'm talking about the ability and cognitive science and neuroscience is actually showing and proving this, that when you close your eyes and you envision yourself hitting that winning shot or being in a certain place that you want to be in, that your brain does not know the difference between what we call reality and what's going on inside of your head. Yeah. Right. So having the ability to manifest that is important. Now, the challenge with that is, and this goes back to the introspection part, is if your programming comes from other people's opinions, other people's creativity, if it comes from, and I'll even throw that out there, if it comes from Instagram and Facebook, not knocking the platforms themselves, but if that's what you're constantly consuming and it is something that is not built or aligned to where you might want to be, then that is going to become your reality, and it's limited to the thoughts of whoever created it, right? But when you're having that conversation internally and you're surrounding yourself with people like yourself, right, who are inspiring the world, who are asking the bigger questions, not only of other people, but I suspect, and I know this to be true without us even talking about it, it's because you're asking yourself those questions first. Every day. How can I be better? Yeah. How can I give more? How can I do more? How can I be more efficient with what I have?
Yeah, and people, you're so true. And I think that people, that journey, I think you have to be prepared. There are people that will perceive me as having great ego. Because I want more, right? And I think I forget who said it, but ego stands for edging God out. It's not about God; it's about me. That's true ego. But if I'm a faith-based person, if I believe that God created me to have a life of abundance and made me capable, then doing anything less, striving for anything less, to me that's true ego. Living a life of settling, that's true ego, because now you're saying I know better than, again, whatever noun you want to put in, right?
Yep.
I know better, and this is really the life that was meant for me, not that life, right?
Yep. Absolutely. And it goes back to the energy conversation. So if I'm the opposite of what you just said, if I'm that person who has convinced myself that, hey, this is enough, this is all I need, this is all I want to do, this is the only impact that I want to have, when you come into my sphere, I'm going to press up against that. Because you're challenging, going back to the values or how we define success, what I believe to be true. And that's why that internal conversation is so difficult. And I would contend that the majority of us, unfortunately, do not have those tough conversations with ourselves and surround ourselves with the type of people that can actually help us to get all of those things. There's so many things, and this is something I truly believe, right? So I have this statement of purpose, or just a blanket statement that I apply to every single thing that I do, right? And I truly believe that my purpose on the face of this planet is to inspire the genius in people to live valiantly so that potential is turned into impact. That's why Torian Richardson exists on the face of this planet, right? To inspire the genius in people to live valiantly so that potential is turned into impact. Now, how that manifests itself, it could be through a podcast, it could be through a book, it could be through a tough coaching conversation with an employee when I worked in a corporate environment. But as long as I know my purpose and I can be rooted and centered in that, then that's how I show up, right? And it takes time. It took a lot of introspection. It's painful, bro. It's painful to do a lot of this stuff, because I had to question who I was, why I was. I had to question how I define success for a very long time, because my parents didn't go to college. I'm a first generation college graduate. Not that means too much, but it's more of an accomplishment type thing than smarts. And I remember getting my first job working in finance, and I thought, hey, listen, this was it. I went to college, got a degree in finance. I understand numbers. I became an analyst. And I realized, although the people that I worked with were amazing, the organization was amazing, and I learned a lot, I hated going into this place every day because it wasn't aligned to what my purpose was on the face of this planet. I was not built to sit in a cubicle for 10 hours crunching numbers and shifting papers. Yeah. I was meant to connect with other human beings, be a connector, and inspire people to live courageously or valiantly so that whatever their genius is, because we all are a genius at something, that it has an exponential impact on other people on the face of this planet.
Wow.
And that's it. And it sounds crazy. And I've gotten that conversation too from friends and, some of my fraternity brothers or anywhere in between, family members for sure. Oh, you think you're better than us.
Yeah.
Or you think you have more of an edge, or just because you've done this that you think you know better. No, I'm trying to figure it out myself. Yeah. But I'm also not afraid to say I don't know, ask questions, and then surround myself with people who are going to help me grow.
Yeah,
so that happens.
I love that, and I think that this to me is the biggest thing that people have to understand, and that for me to understand that as well is that for me it's I don't listen. I think everybody is born enough. I think
Absolutely.
Everybody is born great.
Yeah,
everybody is born with the DNA of greatness in them.
Absolutely. I
think that what happens is we aspire to your point of maybe I'm not as great as this person. I surround myself with people that are like-minded and unlike-minded, right? People say surround yourself with like-minded people. No. Surround yourself with people that are unlike you.
Yeah.
But surround yourself, but be confident enough of yourself to be able to stand in your own truth.
Yes.
And be able to be vulnerable and learn. I think that what happens a lot of times is that we put people on a pedestal. There's nobody on this that lives on this planet Earth that I am in awe of, because to be in awe of another human being means that they were born better than I was, and I don't believe that to be true.
Yes.
But I also don't believe that I was born better than any other human being in this world.
Right.
Nobody.
Right.
And so everybody, once you realize this, I think that, to me, it sets you on this journey. And I didn't always believe this. I thought I was born less than most people. And that was the big shift in my life. And I think this is the message that has to be put out to people. When I go talk to school kids, I'm going to talk to 500 students in a couple of weeks. And the message I'm going to put out to is, you have every bit of possibility and potential to be great, to embrace your greatness and to live on your greatness as every other human on this earth.
Absolutely.
But you just have to embrace it, right? And that sounds very pie in the sky, but I'm saying, what else are you going to believe?
Well, to me, it's not pie in the sky. It is at the very center of this whole inclusion conversation. If I truly know how I organizationally or personally measure success, and I'm living it, not just saying it, right, then it's all centered around everything that you just said. It's centered around growth. It's centered around asking questions. It's centered around maximizing every piece of gift that we have as a person or as an organization. But how can I include others into something that I don't even understand about myself or that I'm not even living, right? I'm going along with the flow because either society or my family or the commercials that I'm watching all the time are telling me, hey, you know what? I need those new blah, 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 in order to feel validated, as opposed to doing exactly what you just said, is starting to have that internal conversation, right? And then, because see, once you start to have that and you're growing / healing internally, because I do use the word healing, because a lot of it can be toxic. I mean, just keeping it real, right? We're being very candid on your show, so I want to, a lot of it, and I know for me, it was healing. It was healing anger, it was healing resentment, forgiveness, because a lot of it for me was the people who I felt were supposed to protect me or help me grow or help maximize my potential weren't doing that during my formative years, right? Yeah. But now I see it from a completely different standpoint. They were doing the best they could in the context in which they understood, right? So in that, forgiveness has completely freed me because I'm not anchored in certain things. That's the tough part, man. And that's where people are like, especially in a professional environment, oh, it's mushy and it's pie in the sky. Absolutely wrong, man. Some of the people that I've worked with that I know personally, cursory, financially, looks amazing internally, and what they have to do to get through certain levels of life is extremely toxic, man. So I think once you have, it's not even balance because that's too linear. Once there's harmony, right? Once there's a holistic approach to this, that's where you start to see exponential growth, not even on yourself, but how you can impact others.
Oh, yeah.
No question, man.
Yeah.
No question.
That. So let's shift a little bit. So you're in Madagascar.
Yes, sir.
And so you've been to 80 countries?
Just under 80. I want to say like 74, 75.
74 different countries, and you're in Madagascar, which I don't even think I could locate on a map. I'm sure if I looked at the map long enough, I'd be able to find it. But you're in Madagascar, and you're working on a documentary. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So called Underrepresented.
Underrepresented, absolutely.
So tell me about it, because just the title alone makes me like beam with like questions.
Well, it's and that's the whole purpose, right? It's to be a little bit provocative. So if we think about the term underrepresented, at least in our society today, it kind of has a negative connotation. And so what we want to do is flip that, right? So the premise is everybody has a story, and all of us as human beings have a need to be heard. So what we're doing is traveling around the world, telling inspiring stories of underrepresented people and communities, right? So think of the late, great Anthony Bourdain, someone who I always admired because he was open to going into new environments, but he was always authentic. Like when you watched his show, you could tell he kind of wasn't feeling this, or he really liked it, or he didn't really jive with this person, he jived with that other person. It wasn't always even keel. He was real, right?
Very, very real.
And I love that about it. And then the universal human connection, which is food. We all like to eat, you know. So what we're doing is taking stories of people from all around the world, starting in Madagascar, of people that feel underrepresented. We're sharing their stories of who they are, right? Some of the trials and tribulations that they have, and then exiting out of the show through inspiration through their favorite meals and how their favorite meal helped them to overcome a certain situation. So we started in Madagascar in the Tenerife, which is the capital of the country. We went up north to Diego, which is a beautiful place. And it's amazing because I know you said you couldn't locate Madagascar. It's a small island off the coast of, east coast of Africa. Yeah. So you have a African or mainland continent of Africa influence. You have a Arabic influence from the north. And then what I didn't know, and I learned this on the show, and we'll highlight some of this, is that you have a huge Polynesian and Indonesian influence. So you have 3 different types of people that have ended up on this island. Then you sprinkle in this French colonization on top. Bro, it's like nothing you've ever seen before. The food, the people, the culture, the pace, how they speak. I mean, everybody speaks at least 3 or 4 different languages. Their native tribal language, Madagascar, French, and then normally some version of English. And so it's amazing, man. 80% of the wildlife and food there is only found on this island. So I'm excited to just bring it to the world, man. So
that's awesome. It's to me, the idea of going full circle from, hey, I don't feel represented, right, to let me sit down and break bread with you over my favorite meal is pretty awesome, right? And that's what we want. But we use, again, I'll go back to what we talked about at the beginning. You're using food as a vehicle, but that can be over anything. Right? It's
favorite drink. Yeah, it can be. But it's really a matter of kind of what we've been talking about this whole way, right? Is how do we meet around commonality? We all like to eat something, right? We all like to drink something. And how do you sit down and really empathetically listen to another person's story, right? And it's going to be, it's different, but what I've learned in doing this, and we're trying to pull out 8 different episodes, but we have, I don't want to lie to you, we probably have about 200 hours worth of content with 3 different cameras, different angles. We travel throughout the whole country. Common bonds, man. I mean, the stories are different, but the end is pretty much the same around what we want, what we desire. And it's really inspiring. I'm excited, man. I'm really excited even talking about it because it just adds, I think, so much value to the human experience anywhere in the world. And I guess from a professional side, what we're trying to do is, if you look at the Francophone countries in the world, there are 29 countries that were either part of France or colonized by France. So if you take out France itself, Canada and Haiti, which is what the majority of the Western population may be aware of, you have 26 countries around the world, Congo, Cote d'Ivoire, Mauritius, that for us, particularly in the United States, we really don't have too much context about. Yeah. So that's the bridge that we're trying to make, is how do we present that to English-speaking countries through me. I'm from an English-speaking country, but in a very authentic and inspirational way.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, bro.
So when are you hoping it's gonna come out? Do you know yet?
So I'm in the process of setting up meetings with Netflix, Facebook Watch, Hulu right now. Yeah. We have a teaser that's going to come out first week of February that we're going to get some feedback on. So yeah, man, we'll see. It's all about distribution at this point. Like what channels of distribution, and with new media. I mean, there are people producing top quality shows that are on YouTube and Instagram TV.
That's what, I had this conversation with a client yesterday in Mississippi that, the internet is really becoming the great equalizer, isn't it? I'm saying the idea that I can film a show, I can film a documentary and put it out there, and I don't have to go through the big 3 or the big 5 now, or whatever it is. I can write a book and self-publish it. I can put my message out on it. It really has become the great equalizer for everybody, hasn't it?
Absolutely, 100%. And I think it's such a great opportunity, even when we talk about what we would deem developing countries. So the way I like to look at things are Mediterranean South and East, just from my personal experience, because I think those are the areas that Western society has the least amount of context for. Right. You look at things like blockchain technology, right? And the ability to make transactions or have transactions without having a centralized banking system, and mobile combined with that, dude, that's going to change the economy. Maybe not for us, but for our children in the next 20, 30 years, it's going to look so different. And the access to different markets. I mean, on the continent of Africa alone, I think you have, and please don't quote me with this number, but I know it's close to about 400 million people under the age of 21, and they all have some type of mobile technology. Wow. Think about that, man. These are untapped, and it's not just about market opportunity. It's about reach. It's about empowerment. It's about messaging, and it's about, economic empowerment and financial freedom as well for everyone. So I think it's going to look great. So you're absolutely right. Great equalizer. However, you still have to be able to harness talent, and you still have to have a high quality. I've always had this dream of maybe being a rapper one day. Taking a shout out to high school, right?
Nice. I do know that if you could spend a day with any musician in the world, it would be Jay-Z.
That is 100% correct.
That is correct.
That is correct. That is correct. I admire not only his music, but his business acumen and his consistency around it. So yeah, that is a person who I would like to meet one day and just have a great conversation, 30, 45 minutes. That would be cool.
All right, so you were saying before I interrupted.
Well, I mean, I don't think I have the talent. I know I don't have the talent to really be a rapper. So you still have to have a level of talent to do certain things. Yeah. But the tools and the distribution channels are open. So, I think this is a great opportunity to be an entrepreneur, to think of new things outside of the box, to try new things, fail early, fail often. Now's the time to do it, man.
So you just mentioned it, and you said it as a kind of throwaway statement, but fail early, fail often.
Yeah.
How is that? What's your mindset about failing? Because somebody's listening, it's like fail early, fail often. What are you talking about? I don't want to fail. I want to succeed.
Well, we do. But if and there's a Michael Jordan commercial about this and stuff like that. But if you think about the word innovation, right? Innovation in itself means what? It means we are going to experiment quickly. We're going to learn and we're going to evolve. Or we're going to pivot to kind of use the lean model. That's failing. Right. And so where we grow organizationally or personally is in trying new things. Things may work out, they may not work out. How do we learn from that? And then how do we slowly start to calibrate so that we could grow exponentially? That's what failure looks like. Right. And what happens for us, and if you think about like a baby, right? How do we learn how to walk? We don't learn how to walk by reading a textbook and saying, okay, now I'm going to stand up and I'm going to walk to the door as a toddler. Yeah. We start to crawl, we fall, our parents get a little bit upset. Oh my gosh, Johnny's going to run into the wall or whatever. We fall, we get back up, we fail until that one day we actually get it right. Yeah. It's the same way I started to learn, Mandarin when I started to learn Chinese. Not saying that I'm proficient at it now, but I moved to China 34, 35 years old. According to science, my brain, there's no way I could ever pick up this language, right? And so I was there for 4 years, but it took me about 2 years to really start to understand just anything because I was trying, learning the vowels, learning the syllables, but it wasn't until I took my mind and my essence back to, okay, yeah, you may think you sound horrible or like an idiot, but it doesn't matter, and started to take it back to basics. And I failed early and often until one day, I will never forget this. I was sitting in McDonald's, and there's a group of women that worked in there, because that was my comfort zone. I would go in and get an Egg McMuffin and a coffee every morning, right? Because that was my, I need something to take me back to the U.S.
Something Americanized.
Right. And so I would go in there, and, for like a year, I'm like pointing like, Jaga, that, this, right? And then one day they were talking, and I will never forget, I was standing there. I understood everything that they said, but in my mind, I was able to think of what the response was and then give it back to them. That came from 18 months of me trying and them laughing at me. It was laughing in a good way, because they were appreciative that I was trying to learn their language, but I was failing. Until I finally got it right. That's innovation, man. That's product generation. That's building a new company. No one has the perfect business plan and gets it right the first time, ever. Yeah. So that's what we mean by failure.
I love that. Yeah, I love that. I love it. Most people will they'll stop because they failed once, rather than keep trying and sound again, because to people it sounds cliche, but man, the best things in life are cliche because they're true. Yeah. They became cliche for a reason, because enough people have failed and then succeeded. That's why it's a cliche statement.
It's real, man. Think about LinkedIn, right? And I challenge all the listeners to go not only to your own LinkedIn page, but other people's LinkedIn page. How many people put up their failures on LinkedIn?
Yeah, very few.
Very few. It looks like a glorified resume where you were a cashier, but you were a daily cash manager. All these different ways in which people say different things. And quick story, I remember I was fired from a job, 2016. And I could give you the short version of the story, but I was working with an organization where I came in to have global responsibilities. And the board decided they didn't want to move into the global space. So I was sent to a major city to start to run the business that we had there. And long story short, without me getting into specifics, because there are a lot of things I kind of saw that were just not good. I saw what it took to be profitable in that market. And we're talking, 80, 90, $100 million business that I was running. And it didn't sit well with me, right? And so I started to make decisions that were not only aligned to my personal values, but aligned to the values of what the organization said that it was about. And so at that time, part of the thing that I negotiated was for them to send me to Harvard Business School, to the general management program. Shout out to GMP 20. Nice. And we have a break, right? We go and then we kind of go back to our job, and then we go back to studying at HBS in Cambridge. And so at the end of our first session, when I went back to work, I was fired from the job, right? And so I came back to Harvard, and I told my classmates, or really the whole class, a story. And it was powerful for me, one, because the professor actually applauded, the decision that was made, that was centered around what I valued in my ethics. And then I heard the same thing from my classmates as well, right? Okay. But my point in this, that's not even the premise of this story. The premise of this story is I actually wanted to put that on my LinkedIn. That now I'm talking about it to the rest of the world, I guess it's okay. Yeah. And the advice that I got from a lot of friends and mentors is like, oh my gosh, no way. You'll be shooting yourself in the foot. Don't put that up there. Like, you don't talk about being fired, right? But now, obviously, I'm very comfortable in talking about it. One, and the real reason is because it's 100% aligned to my values and my purpose. Yeah. So I have no qualms about the decisions that I made, and the consequences that went along with them. But that's just a perfect example of what we see on social media, or professional social media like LinkedIn. It's all about the accomplishments. But when we're able to talk about, hey, I tried this and I failed, and here's what I learned, that's where growth comes in. So that's what I challenge people on. I challenge our clients on, organizations. How do you start to not promote them, but this is what we learn from them so that you can grow exponentially as an organization.
I love that. Yeah. I love that. All right, so a couple more questions. Yeah. Although I could literally do this for hours. So what's next? So you got the documentary.
Underrepresented. Yep. 2019.
You got your own company, right?
Guangxi Universal. Yes. Yeah.
What's next?
That's a great question. The dreams are broad, right? My friend Rich, it's funny. He's one of the only people, I was telling you about him, a friend of mine, Navy SEAL, and he said, Torian, you have big dreams, but they can always be broader, right? Like just your thought process, you want to keep reaching into the boundaries of your potential every single day. And so for me, it's getting this television show off the ground and making it successful globally. But it's really around scaling Guangxi Universal to move outside of coaching and training one-on-one to having a digital presence and a hybrid learning model, because we're a learning analytics company at our very essence. So building that out. And at that point, it's moving. I want to get into the World Economic Forum and start to have more of a global stage around performance, around courageous vulnerability, around empathy and what that looks like, particularly in masculinity and how that affects decision-making process and leadership, and just navigating the uncertainty of life, because that's where things exist. Like we look for certainty a lot of times, but it's the ability to really know how to navigate uncertainty, which is the only constant that we really have, where we're able to truly find success, be comfortable in that.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, man.
Awesome. All right, where do people find you? So where do people connect with you? How do people, I'm going to have you back here. Something tells me that we will be staying in touch. But
sure.
But where do people find you that don't have access to you? Like I now got your cell phone.
I'm not that hard to find,
man. You should have given me that shit, because I'll be blowing it up.
TorianRichardson.com. That's my personal website. We're in the process of revamping that for 2019 now, but that's just my name, TorianRichardson.com. Guangxi Universal, which is the professional side from the coaching, consulting, and learning analytics. So that's GUANXI Universal, UNIVERSAL.com. And those are the two places. Social media, I'm across all social media platforms at Torian Online. That's TORIANONLINE.
Yeah,
that's it, man. That's
if
it.
If you want to see the Turkish bath building, right? Not the actual bathing, but the Turkish bath building, you got to check it out. I'm saying it was beautiful. I saw it. I was watching. I was like, man, this is like I've been to Ephesus, in Turkey.
Yeah.
But I wasn't in the epicenter where I would have the ability to do a Turkish bath. But I'm all in.
Well, I'll tell you what. One of the things that we're trying to do with Underrepresented, we're doing season 2 in Cote d'Ivoire, but we do want to get to Turkey, and I actually want to film the bathing part, because the process in itself is amazing. Just to see, how it's done, what's done. There's a cadence, or almost a rites of passage through the whole thing. It was almost like pledging my fraternity.
How did you feel coming out?
Dehydrated. That was number one. Definitely dehydrated, because I sweat a lot, and that was just an exhausting experience. I did feel refreshed, but not only physically. It was an internal process for me. But again, I try to approach everything from inside out, right? So it was very much all right, like, how are you cleansing internally as well as going through the experience?
Yeah.
And so it's interesting, because I'm writing an article and how that relates to inclusion as well. Kind of the story that I told a little bit earlier in the podcast around everything about that challenging a lot of my social norms, and how we have to do that organizationally in order to create real solidarity for performance in an organization.
Yeah, I love that. All right, last question.
Yeah, man.
So 50 years from now, 60 years from now, when you leave this earth, what do you want your contribution to have been?
Oh, boy. For people to believe in the impossible and have the courage to seek it, because I didn't get a chance to share this story, but over the past 5 or 6 years, I spent time with 3 different people that were dying of cancer. Yeah. One was a good friend of mine from high school, one was my aunt, and another one was a young lady named Veronica I used to work with years ago. And none of them knew each other, but they all had kind of the same message for me when I asked them about, life, and if you could do things differently or over again, like, what would you do? And none of them talked about, well, first of all, none of them said, but I'm happy I have X amount of dollars in the bank, right? it was all about not even what they had done or what they feel they had failed at or whatever. It was about the things that they always wanted to do and never took their shot at doing it. Whether it was having that conversation with the person on the train who they thought, may have looked good, or that business that they wanted to start. It was about having the courage to actually do the things that they wanted to try, and they didn't, time had run out for them. And that's when they all started crying. That's when they all, started to kind of talk about some of the things that I may have been doing, but really hit home with me. Hey, listen, we can't earn back time, man. So that itch that we have for the passion that we may want to do or something we want to try, now is the time to do it. So that's what I want to do. Like the things that we think are impossible, to instill the courage in other people to say, hey, I want to go for it, and then to valiantly do that on a day-to-day basis. Put action behind it. And hopefully I'm doing that by example.
Yeah. Listen, we've only known each other a little over a month now, but I'm telling you, I find the whole, everything, the conversation today, the conversation we had, just like in a level of inspiring that makes me question. Like I wake up and I'm like, all right, listen, I'm crushing this shit. Right?
You are, bro.
I'm gonna crush this. I'm gonna crush my life, and then I'm like, shit, there's a whole nother level. I gotta. There's a whole nother level. But what's awesome about it is finding inspiration in yourself, but also finding inspiration in others, and using that to do what you just said. Act on it.
Yes, act.
Act on the moment, because that momentary of inspiration, that's you at your very best self.
Yes.
That's not you in a crazy state. That's you in your very best self with all the shields, the swords, the shit dropped down for that moment, the momentary of clarity. That's you. Act on it before you put all that shit back.
That's right. Courageous vulnerability. That's it.
Courageous vulnerability.
So you are inspirational to me. Even, yes, it's an honor and a privilege being here on your podcast, but just seeing you do it, another story. I know we got to go.
I'm in no. I feel bad again for you. I can see you all day.
No, we can do this, man. But sitting in your office and seeing your vision board and your goals and things that you want to do, this is a physical manifestation of God speaking to me. You're inspiring me, not by having me be on your platform, but by seeing you taking action behind something that is important to you, that you dream about, and creating this platform. Yeah, so thanks, man. I appreciate it. And it has nothing to do with me. Just the names of the list of people you have on there, man. Keep pushing, bro. Seriously, because I love it. And I will make sure that I push out everything to my network, because they need to see this type of purpose-driven content.
Purpose-driven. I love that. Yeah, you got to have purpose in this world, right?
Absolutely, man.
Purpose-driven. All right, we got to have you back, right? So
never, bro.
Again, we could do this. We could do this for hours. What's your superpower?
Oh boy, it's and somebody told me this. I think it's connecting with people through listening. I love listening to people. I do. I really love listening to people, especially if they have a different point of view. It's one of the reasons why I wish I spoke more languages, because like when I go to places, I'm like, I want to know what they're really, really saying, right? And just doing that and meeting people kind of where they are.
That's awesome. All right, listen. If you like this podcast, check it, share it, hit comment, find you online. I'm telling you,
please.
Spread the word. And then when you see the show come online, make sure you're
Underrepresented. Check us out. Underrepresented.com.
I'm going to be all over that shit. And it includes food, and I like to eat. I'm a big guy. So awesome. All right, thanks, guys.
All right, man. Appreciate it, bro. All right, peace.